Welcome to the 700 Club. More than 2/3 of the nation is baking in a blistering heat wave. From coast to coast, there are warnings of deadly high temperatures expected to last throughout the weekend.
The extreme heat is also intensifying wildfires and drought in the West, as well as fueling soaring energy costs all across America. Heather Sells reports.
More than 100 million people in the U.S. are facing heat advisories and excessive heat warnings. They are in 29 states ranging from California to New Hampshire. And public safety officials are warning these temperatures are dangerous. You may have seen this viral video, a UPS driver in Arizona collapsing as he rang a doorbell. Another driver told ABC 15,
"The fact of the matter is that no amount of training can prepare your body for 160 degrees, 10 to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week." He
described just how the heat is affecting him.
There's been several times where I've woken up in the middle of the night, cramping up, my legs cramping, my hands are cramping.
Experts warn that heat is the top weather killer. It can lead to dehydration, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. It can also lead to other dangers. In Georgia, a lightning strike killed one soldier at Fort Gordon and injured 9 others. In states like Texas, it's fueling wildfires.
It's very difficult. The heat is playing a role on the firefighters.
This week's historic heat wave is now moving east, from the plains to cities like Philly, Boston, and New York. One utility is telling customers to conserve to avoid outages.
Don't run your air conditioner when you're not at home. Don't cool rooms that you're not in. Close the door. And if you're running heavy appliances like a washing machine, dishwasher, try to use that late at night or early in the morning when the system is not in high demand.
Climate change activists say global warming is driving the historic temperatures, but other experts note that urban sprawl is also accelerating the trend.
We're putting more pavement, black pavement, more buildings, stone, concrete.
Temperatures are also ramping up in Europe, where people in cities like London and Paris are flocking to fountains and water sprinklers to escape the unusual hot and dry conditions. More than 1,000 deaths are blamed on the weather, and it's also led to wide-ranging forest fires. For Americans, it is a heat alert weekend, a time to limit outdoor activity, keep cool, and keep safe. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Well, in the height of this heat wave, the president has announced executive actions to fight climate change. John Jessup has more on that from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. Speaking in Massachusetts, the president said climate change is a, quote, clear and present danger to the nation.
So we have to act. Extreme weather disrupts supply chains, causing delays and shortages for consumers and businesses. Climate change is literally an existential threat to our nation and to the world. So my message today is this: since Congress is not acting as it should, and these guys here are, but we're not getting many Republican votes, this is an emergency, and I will look at it that way.
The president vowed to use executive action to fight climate change, including $2.3 billion in FEMA funding to build infrastructure to help in extreme weather situations. Mr. Biden also promised more robust action in the future, but climate change is low on Americans' list of concerns. Only 1% named it the biggest concern facing their families in a Monmouth University poll. Well, on Capitol Hill Wednesday, an emotional plea for more aid to Ukraine. First Lady Olena Zelenska is here in Washington this week meeting with lawmakers. Speaking on the House floor, she asked for more help in her country's fight against the Russian invasion.
I am asking for weapons that would not be used to wage a war on somebody else's land, but to protect one's home and the right to wake up alive in that home. I'm asking for air defense systems in order for rockets not to kill children in their strollers.
The First Lady highlighted the plight of innocent civilians, specifically children, whom she says have been killed by Russian missile strikes. Meanwhile, the White House warns that Russia is planning to annex more Ukrainian territories. Russia seized the Crimean Peninsula in 2014. U.S. intelligence officials say it's following the same playbook to claim more territory as part of Russia later this year, naming the southern areas of Kherson and Zaporizhia and the eastern regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. Russian forces currently control all or much of those territories. Well, the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th Capitol invasion holds its final summer hearing tonight. The primetime hearing will focus on former President Trump's activities after the Capitol was breached. The committee says Mr. Trump did not take action to stop the riot for more than 3 hours. It's expected to show testimony from former White House counsel Pat Cipollone and 2 other aides about what happened during that time, as well as review some Secret Service text messages from January 5th and 6th that the committee subpoenaed. It's also investigating reports that some had been deleted. Lawmakers hope to prevent an event like January 6th from happening again. A bipartisan group of senators led by Maine Republicans Susan Collins and West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin announced a new bill Wednesday. It reforms the Electoral Count Act to clarify the role of the vice president and Congress when it comes to a contested presidential election. CBN's Caitlin Burke explains.
In short, the Electoral Count Act lays out how Congress counts electoral college votes from each state, especially when there's a challenge. After a disputed election in 1876, the Electoral Count Act established a joint session of Congress to oversee the counting of electoral votes. During that process, any written objection to the votes from at least one House member and one senator sends lawmakers back to their respective houses to consider the objection. The power to sustain or overrule placed fully with Congress. That scenario played out after the 2020 presidential election, and now the public hearings by the January 6th committee have thrust the law back into the spotlight. Lawmakers alleging that former President Donald Trump knowingly tried to exploit loopholes to stay in power.
What exactly did President Trump know? When exactly did President Trump know that it would be illegal for Mike Pence to refuse to count electoral votes? Here is one sample of testimony given by one of the witnesses before us today, the Vice President's General Counsel.
Did John Eastman ever admit, as far as you know, in front of the President, that his proposal would violate the Electoral Count Act?
I believe he did on the 4th.
Trump and others insist Vice President Mike Pence had the power to throw out certain election results or send them back to the states.
They were hoping that there would be objections made under the act by a member of the House and a member of the Senate to the electoral votes coming from particular states, places like Georgia and Arizona, and then there would be a debate about whether they should be sustained or overruled. They were all overruled. And so the vice president did not have the power to then somehow change what the Senate had decided, what the House had decided. I think there were folks hoping he would do that, but he just didn't have the power to do it, neither under the statute nor under the Constitution.
Hans von Spakovsky, an election integrity expert with the Heritage Foundation, says the vice president's role in certifying election results is purely ministerial, which means he really doesn't have any power at all, a point Pence himself has addressed.
I had no right to overturn the election. The presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president.
While Spakovsky sees 2020 as an example of the Electoral Count Act working, a bipartisan group of lawmakers feel the law needs to be clarified. The bill clarifies that the vice president does not have the power to reject electors and makes it more difficult for Congress to object to an election by requiring the support of 1/5 of the House and Senate. It also says a state can appoint only one set of electors, which is submitted to Congress by one designated official. Candidates with concerns would take their case to a 3-judge panel and have an expedited path to the Supreme Court. A second bill aims at protecting poll workers by doubling fines for threats and intimidation. It also clarifies how the post office should handle mail-in ballots. The hope is to have the bill pass Congress long before the November midterm elections. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Caitlin. Gordon, back to you.
Once the states certify their electors, it should be over. That certification process should take into account any objections to it. There's plenty of opportunity within both state and federal courts to object if there are any particular problems in any particular state's votes. This bill will clarify that whole process, take it to the House and Senate, where if one member of Congress and one member of the Senate object, then both the House and the Senate go back and consider that objection. And it clarifies the role of the vice president. The vice president is there just to count the votes.